It took 6 minutes, just 6, for a jury in Connecticut to find a man guilty of 2 murders. 6 minutes for 2 murders, even though there was no DNA, there were no fingerprints, they never found a murder weapon, and there was not a scrap of video of the crime. 6 minutes for 12 people to get into a jury room and make up their minds and then come back to the court with 2 guilty verdicts. That might be a record. That was back in 2010 after Marquise Hill murdered 2 people execution style outside of a nightclub. And 5 people said they saw him do it. Case closed. In contrast, no one saw Rachel Morin's killer violently take her life on a jogging trail in Maryland. No one saw him rape her and violently strangle her before bashing her head in with a rock. No one saw that killer drag Rachel for 150 feet, leaving a trail of blood all the way to the filthy drainage culvert where that killer dumped her body. But there seemed to be little question about who did it today in a Maryland courtroom, because a jury took just 46 minutes to say Victor Martinez-Hernandez, an undocumented immigrant from El Salvador, was that vicious killer on the Ma and Pa Trail 2 years ago. 46 minutes. Guilty on 4 counts against him. My guess, he is never going to get out of prison. And if Maryland were a death penalty state, which it is not, I am also guessing that he would be a perfect candidate for the needle, the chair, or the firing squad. But again, it is not, and he is not. Victor Martinez-Hernandez, however, will forever be known as the man who took Rachel Morin's life, a mother of 5, who was just out for a run in August of 2023. Guilty of first-degree murder, first-degree rape, third-degree sex offense, and kidnapping for good measure. The case, just 9 days long, was so violent, so cruel, and so graphic, we could not air most of it. The killer had no alibi, and the killer lied non-stop. But most importantly, the killer's DNA was found on Rachel, around Rachel, and inside Rachel. After all, this was a rape before a killing. It goes without saying his defense attorney did not have a whole lot to work with, except, to hopelessly point fingers at others. Oh, look over there, Rachel's boyfriend. The one and only witness that they called was a digital forensic analyst, because they tried to suggest that Rachel's Google searches might have pointed to a jilted lover. It did not work. Defense put on a 10-minute case. Rachel's boyfriend cooperated with the police from the beginning. He was never considered a suspect. Let's compare and contrast, shall we, with Victor Martinez-Hernandez, who, when finally caught last year in Oklahoma, of all places, denied up and down ever knowing anybody named Rachel Morin. Nah, never heard of her, never seen her, don't know her, never been there. Never even been to Maryland, he said. Never been there. Again, his DNA was all over the crime scene and all over Rachel. By the way, here he is being interrogated by the detectives with a little help from an interpreter.
Pero ¿cómo aseguran que yo fui?
Well, how can you be sure it's me?
Through DNA.
Por la evidencia que tenemos.
Solo por el ADN.
Sí.
Si es el ADN, cualquiera se lo puede agarrar a uno y hacerle daño. Not in the way that it was left.
No en la manera.
Yeah, it's like, that's what you call in a corner, figuratively and literally. He just kept on denying everything. Everything. Never been to Maryland. But cell phone data and security video and his own family said otherwise. As far as Maryland was concerned, oh, he'd been there. Actually, he'd lived there. And he had worked there at a local Popeyes. He even stayed with relatives there, relatives he later claimed didn't exist. You may also remember that Months before the Maryland attack, this thing happened. He allegedly assaulted a child and her mother in their home in Los Angeles. But that attack did not even come up in court, even though it was his DNA found that attack didn't even come up. Nor did the politics surrounding his unlawful presence in the United States of America. That's important. The politics, the mention of that case, and that did not come up. When the verdict was read, Rachel Morin's mother hugged the prosecutor. But this killer, he didn't show any emotion, nothing, stone cold, before being cuffed and escorted out of the courtroom. I am joined now by the attorney for Rachel Morin's family, Randolph Rice. Mr. Rice, thank you for coming back. It's been very helpful to talk to you through this process, as I can imagine that this has just been so overwhelming for Rachel's family. Take me to the moment where you learned 46 minutes into deliberations that there was a verdict.
Yeah, Ashleigh, thanks for having me on, and I think you gave a really good overview of this case. You know, I think they probably were looking for a pen just to fill out the jury sheet because it was quick. We were all settled in for maybe a couple of hours, but when you have a verdict come back that quick, the general rule says it's not good for the defendant, and certainly that proved true today when they came back out and read off that jury sheet and said guilty on all the top counts and really just sealed his fate.
So what was the reaction of your clients, Rachel's mom, Patty, and the rest of her family?
Yeah. Patty was tearing up, obviously. I think that this was somewhat of a relief. I think this had been a long 19 months. And while certainly this doesn't change the fact that Rachel's still dead and they're, obviously never going to see her again, it is maybe a hurdle they've sort of overcome getting this conviction, now knowing that this man can never hurt another woman like Rachel Morin again.
Not that we expected Victor Martinez-Hernandez's demeanor to change from the way it has been all throughout this case, stone cold, when horrifying photographs were paraded across the screens, as they have to be in these cases. But what about the moment where he learned that the guilty verdicts, as he knows, will likely mean he will never get out of prison?
Yeah, he has been consistent this whole trial with showing very little emotion. During the trial, he was taking notes. He occasionally looked up at videos. But when they read the verdict, it was just like, no big deal. Stone cold face, like you said in the open. It just was not registering what had just happened to him.
So when they let him out of court, I mean, that's really a moment where oftentimes, and you tell me, victims' family members feel at ease. Because if the killer is there in your presence, you can be relieved, but you really can't feel the weight of your life maybe returning to some semblance of what it was. Tell me a little bit about Patty, the things that she said afterwards, and how she's doing tonight, the mom.
Yeah, I mean, she's exhausted, really. I mean, because this has been a long trial. I think the emotional exhaustion sort of taken a toll on her. When they handcuffed him, almost in a symbolic way, because they typically lead him in and out of the courtroom without handcuffs. But that moment that the deputies all handcuffed him and then led him out of the courtroom really had an effect on the entire courtroom. And the entire courtroom stuck around. Usually people would leave, but I think everybody actually wanted to see him have those handcuffs placed on him. And then Patty went around and hugged all of the detectives, all the investigators, thanking them. The FBI agents were there, the HSI agent was there, and just thanking them for all the work that they had done in this case.
Did anybody show up for him? Did he have one family member, one friend, anybody, a supporter?
Well, they had the family members there that were testifying against him in the first couple of days saying, oh, yeah, he's been in Maryland, all right. We saw him because he was living on our couch, and they identified him. And in fact, one of the male family members was not too happy staring him down, knowing that a rapist and a killer was living in his house with his wife and daughter.
I'll bet. And did anyone show up for that verdict?
We didn't see anybody from the family there, no. And we understand that the girlfriend and the baby are still in El Salvador, so there's no family here that would. And look, he's burned every bridge, actually. I mean, from the testimony is he would just sort of bounce around until the family members got sick of him being there. He wasn't paying for things. He was causing a ruckus, and they just kick him out.
Sounds about right. Let me ask you, because when you say El Salvador, that tweaks for a lot of people because, you know, the news has been showing a lot of images of, I think it's called CICOT, the terrorism confinement center in El Salvador. It's that place where all those prisoners are dressed in white shorts, often bare-chested, with their tattoos showing, being marched, you know, with their heads shoved down. We've seen these images nonstop. It's basically a contracted prison in El Salvador that the Americans are putting all of the ICE detainees when they're flying them out of the country. Those are federal processes. This is a state process. But is there any chance that a guy like Victor Hernandez is going to end up being shipped out of American prisons and into this place?
Well, as you mentioned, it's probably a safe bet that he's going to receive life without parole, which means he'll spend the rest of his life in a Maryland Department of Corrections somewhere either on the eastern shore or the western shore of Maryland. I can tell you they're not very nice places to be. So he will probably die in a Maryland Department of Corrections facility.
I mean, listen, everything's kind of upside down these days with process. I mean, there's a lot of challenges going on to the Trump administration's efforts, whether you like them or hate them. And I just wondered if it would be possible if the federal government would appeal to the Maryland state government and the penal system to try to extract a guy like that, just to make a show of it, to send him down to where not only listen, Maryland prisons may not be great, but that prison, you don't see the light of day and you're not allowed visitors ever.
You know, that's an interesting question. And I've had a lot of people ask me that. Do you think that he could get shipped off? And the answer is you never know. I mean, certainly a possibility that they somehow say, hey, look, we want to get this guy out of here. But there could be that worry that, you know, maybe he gets out of there, he somehow comes across the border and we don't have control over him. If we know he's in a Department of Corrections facility in Maryland, we know that he's not going to be able to hurt anybody like a Rachel Morin again.
Well, that makes sense for anybody who's watching thinking, ship him out, send him to the horrible place. You're only as good as the leader of that country in terms of security of that prison. And if there's any falling out between America and El Salvador, who knows what happens to those who America has asked them to guard. So it's a good point to make. Sentencing. Let's talk about sentencing. I don't actually know the date, the plan, what's scheduled, or is anything scheduled yet?
Nothing's scheduled yet. The court today ordered what's called a pre-sentence investigation, where they'll go in and just get background information about him. And they also ordered a psychiatric and a sexual evaluation as well. Those reports typically take about 60 to 90 days to be done. So we're guessing that probably somewhere around the 90-day period, sentencing will happen. And that's where the judge will have the opportunity to give him that life without parole.
So here's the comment from his team. We are disappointed in the verdict, obviously, which will be reviewed by our team. We will now focus on sentencing and ensuring that Mr. Martinez-Hernandez has a fair process that balances all of the relevant factors. I got about 10 seconds left. What factors might help him here? Anything?
They're going to try to find any type of appellate issue, and I'm sure they're going to raise that within 30 days after his sentencing, and then we just have to wait for the appellate courts.
Yeah. Hey, Randolph Rice, I really appreciate you guiding us through this process. And please pass on our condolences to Rachel Morin's mom and the rest of her family.
I will. Thanks, Ashleigh.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.